Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. Saturday morning sit down.
And we are back. What is going on with Trump in Singapore? Who in Singapore likes Trump? Who doesn't? How many people like him? Why do they like him? We just can't seem to get away from the U.S. president, no matter, even if we're 9,000 miles away. And to take us through some research that he has done on this very point is David Black, founder and CEO of Blackbox Research, good friend of the show, been on many times before. David, welcome back.
Good morning. Thanks for having me again.
Happy to have you here. Now, the research you've done, I won't give it away because I'll let you give us the headlines and the top lines, but a surprising number of people in Singapore, Singaporeans, really like Donald Trump. Take us through your research and the numbers. What does it look like?
Sure. Well, every quarter we drop in a sentiment monitor with Singaporeans. We like to keep track of what's going on, what people are thinking. So I like to say to people, the job of pollsters is to try and sort of channel those thousands of dinner table conversations that are going on every week. So needless to say, in our last survey, we were very interested in how Singaporeans are feeling about a second Trump ascendancy and what impact that will have here.
So that was in January?
That was just at the beginning of January, so just after the Christmas break and before Chinese New Year. And what we found, so this is pre-inauguration and certainly pre the last 10 days of activity from the new president. But the initial reactions when we asked, do you think that Donald Trump is going to be a positive or a negative for Singapore? Not really a question about who you'd vote for, but whether he's going to be a positive or negative for us. Turns out about 7 in 10 Singaporeans think that, on balance, at this point in time, Donald Trump is going to be a positive for Singapore.
Nearly 70%.
Nearly 70%. And that's a real contrast, I have to say, to stretches my mind now, but I did similar work back in 2016. We did a big study right across Southeast Asia, and we even included China when we asked. And at that time, China, in fact, was the only country that was positive about Trump. So you can see there's a real turnaround this time around. So,
any ideas where? Because, just a bit of context. I do believe Donald Trump, the first time, never came to Singapore, did he?
He did.
No, of course he did, for the Trump.
For the Trump-Kim summit.
For the Trump
How could you forget, Neil?
How could I forget? Yes, of course he did.
The $20 million photo app. Photo
I'm thinking of, did Biden come to Singapore?
Kamala did.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala did, and a bunch of members of the administration. I don't think Biden did come, though.
Okay, so he did come to Singapore. Yes, how could I forget the Kim summit? But second time around, factually, he is a convicted felon. He's made a lot of his ambitions clear, shall we say, for putting America first. So it might be seen as surprising that there's a greater swing towards him. So what did you find for that?
Yeah, well, when we published that, and it got fairly widely circulated, that this 70% figure, and I think I got a lot of initial feedback online, certainly to me and to Blackbox, sort of saying, well, that just reflects people's naivety, whereas I just don't think that's true. I think what it really reflects is a couple of things. I think, firstly, Trump is seen as a kind of fairly muscular, strong type
macho
of leader,
kind of,
very much, and I think there's that sort of dimension to it. I think secondly, also the Singaporeans are quite pragmatic, and they look at the economic climate, they look at investments. They saw Trump dip into the sort of crypto area, and a lot of those areas are of a real interest to Singaporeans. And I think certainly there's a dimension there of he'll be good for the economy. So when we ask whether he's going to be positive or negative, it's really a case of, your hip pocket. Do you think it's a Trump presidency is going to be good for us or bad for us? So you can argue with that. You can say, well, maybe we're going to get caught in the trade, cross wires or things like that. But I think certainly initially, the initial reaction for most people was economically is probably going to be quite good. I think there's also another dimension, because we did notice some age sort of differences in that. And I think, I don't generally like the term, but the kind of anti-woke element, I think, is something older Singaporeans may kind of find more appealing. And it's not really so much the woke, but the fact that he kind of, represents, or at least kind of tries to reflect these particular values or traditions or conservative sort of approaches, which I think some people do tap into and buy into. And there was a lot of noise in and around that topic as well. So I don't think there's any one factor, but certainly I think if you look at a few different things. The starting point for Trump was, he looks okay, let's give him a go. Could be a real positive for us.
We're talking with David Black of Blackbox Research. Research they did early in January indicating 70% of Singaporeans favor Donald Trump or his new administration. David, do you imagine that might change with a February or March survey that you might do, a sentiment survey? And the reason I ask you this is Jacqueline Poe, the managing director for the Economic Development Board, just came out this Thursday and said it's going to be a volatile era for Singapore. Singapore may, is going to have to deal with vulnerability, indirect or direct collateral impacts of protectionist policies, et cetera. This is coming from the EDB. So there is concern among the Singapore government that Singapore may be a unwitting benefactor in a bad way of some of these policies. Do you think your sentiment survey might start to shift a little bit now that people are seeing some of the possible policies that might come in place and impact Singapore?
My feeling is it's going to have to be quite direct, insofar as I think Trump seems to be lining up those he wants to sort of take on at the moment. And, a lot of that is focused on the international stage as well as kind of domestic politics. I think it would be that Singapore itself would have to be caught in those crosshairs, and directly impacted. I mean, the government, the Prime Minister are always at odds to, reinforce the fact that we're very dependent on a global economy, very dependent on trade. And if we get caught very much in that, I can see those numbers going down very, very quickly. But I think it would have to be something quite direct that impacts Singapore, as opposed to lots of noise he might be making in Europe or the Middle East or Latin America, those sorts of places.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it'd be here. Also, I think the other side...
Are you doing this every month, this sentiment survey?
We do it quarterly. I mean,
Quarterly.
we're doing lots and lots of studies all the time, but this is a quarterly one where we kind of really dig deep. We look at general sentiment of people, how they're feeling about the economy, whether they think the country's on the right track, how they feel about the political figures and things like that. And then we throw in usually every quarter whatever topics of the day are kind of, kind of relevant and people are talking about.
So would April be the next one?
Yeah,
First of
probably
April?
late March, early April we'll probably do the next one. A lot will be dependent on what I hear in the next 4 to 6 weeks in terms of election timings as well, because I'll kind of look around that. As you know, in Singapore, there's no polling during the election kind of window. So, timing is everything for us. So we'll be looking at that. Yeah. We'll be doing work, obviously, after the budget on the 18th,
coming right up.
So we'll be doing some work just after that as well and looking at some of that. So, and the last thing I would say about the Trump thing in Singapore and whether those numbers would change, Glenn, would be really the extent to which the rhetoric between China and the US might pick up, if it does at all. If that picks up, then I think we can expect to see some numbers. So far, there's, it's kind of, all below the radar. There are things going on, but it's not really the headlines at the moment.
Yeah.
If that becomes a headline, then I think we can expect to maybe see some change in sentiment.
Well, the key word you mentioned there, David, was impact. Anything that has a direct impact on Singapore. A couple of weeks ago, I read that the word tariff was one of the most Googled in Singapore during that period, not surprisingly. Did that come up at all during your survey, or was that too early, the concept of tariff, the idea of tariff? Because Trump has been talking about it for a long time, even before he got elected. Was that a concern at all in your initial survey?
No, we didn't. I mean, we kept it fairly simple at this point in time because, he hadn't been, inauguration hadn't taken place. So I think these are things we will explore in the future. I think you have to be careful, though, with the more technical and deep dive type of stuff. I mean, even with tariff, I think most people understand what a tariff is. But, once you get below the surface, most people are kind of like, ho-hum about, the details of it. But, if we were to see sort of, something, as I said before, something quite direct where, we're increasing tariffs on anything coming from Singapore, things like that, obviously that's going to have a major impact. But I think the general conversation about tariffs, I think, most people sort of tune it in, but then they tune it out pretty quickly as well.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating stuff. I can't wait to see. Would your questions be different? Let's say on the Trump stuff, would your questions be different in the March-April survey than they
I'd like
were?
to keep that question about the optimism and pessimism moving forwards.
Yeah.
But what I think we will do, and again, a lot of it is depending on what the news of the day is. We'll probably dig a bit deeper on some of those things. Obviously, in a lot of the other research I do, which is more topic or issue driven, we are exploring those sorts of things. And I think over the next 6 months, we'll be doing certainly a lot more on that in terms of sort of business, general Southeast Asian economy, those sorts of things, and what sort of impact. But I have to say, apart from Trump, there's been a lot of more local kind of regional news recently. Things like the special economic zone in JB, coming election, a budget coming up, all those sorts of things. So there's a lot going on at the moment. I think it's not just Trump.
Yeah. Last question for me on the Trump survey you did, because it seems to buck even American trends. Let me see if I've read this correctly. Men were 67% positive, Singaporean men, towards the idea of a Trump presidency. Women were 70% positive towards a Trump presidency.
It's not a huge difference.
It's not, but it wouldn't be that high in the US, I believe, even. It would be slightly lower. Men generally rate higher than women in the US towards Trump.
But also the question we just asked about: are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Right. But do you know
whether you like or dislike or support or oppose? Again, in America, I think what you usually find just after an inauguration, if you ask the question about, optimism and stuff, most people are optimistic about a new president. Sometimes that drops off quite quickly. But most of the time, Americans vote a new president. Well, they bring in a new president, even they haven't voted for him. I always notice over time that most people start off as being reasonably optimistic about a president. Now, Trump has sort of taken office in a style which I think is kind of maybe a little unusual compared to previous presidents. So whether that is that optimism index.
You're the master of understatement, aren't you? A little bit unusual.
The reason I'm asking, David, is purely objectively. I think this is the first survey I've ever seen where there's been a slight female preference towards Trump anywhere. I can't. I know it's only 3% and it's marginal, but it's just interesting to me. That's the first one I've seen where women have come out on top of men in terms of a support for Trump.
Well, certainly there's no gender gap. There's no gender gap there. So there was a bit of an age gap, I have to say. I think it kind of
older people.
I think a lot of older people kind of buy into the kind of more conservative dimensions and whatever else. So there was some.
You said conservative dementias?
Dimensions.
Oh, dimensions. Okay, gotcha. Okay, just want to make sure we got that
Freudian slips. Yes.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.